Welcome back, and this is the third in the series of the excerpts from the book reading that I'm doing. And the reason I'm doing it is not to villainize anybody, but to get some insights into the background of that horrific abuse, horse abuse, dressage horse abuse video, which Charlotte Dujardin has admitted to participating in. And thank you very much for your comments, your contributions, and for generally just following this, because if we don't keep it going, then there are a lot of people who may just forget that it ever happened. They may window dress it and it will be business as usual, and still these sport horses will continue to suffer. So before I go to the book, I would like to have a look at the comments on the video, the last video. First one is remarking about Valegro being a very severe head shaker early in his training. And they say, a head shaker so bad that Hester considered surgery. He was not sound, and that poor horse had to endure such a rigorous training schedule, had to travel and live under so much stress. It's really hard to listen to, but thank you again for sharing it. Everyone thinks these Olympians and their horses are born from fairy tales, where they are actually created from. My response, it's devastating that these riders continue to ride when their horse is clearly in pain. Or should we look to the veterinarians to make it clear that the horse should not be ridden? Admittedly, there is no doubt when a horse is lame, although even those are being medicated for work, but it's clearly the veterinarian who has the duty of care to prevent suffering and head shaking while riding, as has been described for Valegro, absolutely is suffering. The problem is nobody's being held accountable for the horse's suffering here. And yet it's being normalized that there isn't a problem with this, because Charlotte Dujardin has put this in her autobiography. She's not even trying to hide it. Thank you for the analysis part 2, interesting training methods. It's not training. Valegro sounds like he was put under an immense amount of pressure, and that is what makes a horse break down, never to recover, ready to be thrown on the muck heap. CD sounds competitive to the point of full-on aggression. Yeah, very interesting insight there, that the will to win can be so aggressive. Now, almost it's like the video, the horsewhipping video, is like a culmination, a demonstration, a manifestation of that full-on aggression. So this is where really worrying stuff, and this is why I'm making these videos and reading the book. This is it in her own words. I'm not here to make stuff up. I'm reading from her book. I know some of you who may or may not be watching, but some of you think that I'm here villainizing her, but these are her own words. These are her recollections, her experiences, and I'm deeply concerned about them. But I'm more concerned that the RSPCA in the UK haven't jumped on this. I'm assuming that because there is a process, an ongoing process with the FEI, that the RSPCA is waiting in the wings to see what the outcome will be. And it's probably difficult for the FEI committee, the disciplinary committee, to do the right thing here and do what the public expects them to do, because we may find that their procedures are not robust enough to protect the sport horses that are registered with them and the riders who abuse them. So they're going through changes at the moment, and I have seen some positive things coming from the direction of the FEI, and I'll talk about those when I've completed the book review. So it's interesting times. Being at the top of her game, the world is watching, not necessarily to fail, but watching her every move, because she's now in the spotlight and under the radar. Yeah, we all thought something very different about her. We held her in the highest esteem because we believed that she was an ethical rider. As Isabel Worth said of Tortillas, those who rise high fall deep. Yeah, they do. This is the world of celebrity. It's possible to be cancelled, especially seems you can cancel yourself as well. And this applies not to everyone, but to those who may become overconfident or complacent and at the top of their game. Yes, invincible. They may think that they can't fall because they're so far up. But that said, I do think that Charlotte Dujardin got a massive shake-up to have had to withdraw from the Olympics while she was getting ready to go. Basically, she just had her hat and coat to get on and go on her way. And is that true that the curb chain lies on an acupressure point? There's very little science on acupuncture. We know that it can address certain conditions and that it's a useful treatment, but until there's more evidence of where these points are, then I can't comment. Jennifer, our resident former FEI judge, retired paramedic and horse trainer in Ontario, Canada. I've spoken to parents telling them in a nice way that their child isn't ready to go to a show. They get upset with me often, but I hold my ground. I will not put any child in a dangerous position. And at a show, there's so much going on. The horse or pony that they own isn't ready for the showground yet. But then I'll tell the parent, I'll take that horse or pony to some shows, get them used to the atmosphere, and then, and only then, when they aren't reactive, will I allow that student to go to a show. Yeah, I thought that was the norm, was to, first of all, take horse and rider to familiarize themselves with competition conditions, but it would seem not. And as I was saying in the last session, it's the parents' ambition, and even if the parents aren't ambitious, obviously they want their child to have as much opportunity as possible, but they need to cool their jets, some of them, or the child risks being injured. And then, and only then, when they aren't reactive, will I allow that student to go to a show. I've basically said, go Jen, back in the day, this is how we did it. We had lead rein classes for young children to get the experience in the safest way. So they could still participate, they could still compete, but under highly controlled conditions. Somebody's asking why they can't find Jennifer's name on the FEI judges list. Some people just don't believe you. Some people are very Skeptical. Jennifer gives the reasons why. She's been retired for over 20 years and they don't keep names on longer than that if they were whistleblowers and troublemakers like I was. And basically, she's been erased from the books. Somebody here says, time to leave her alone. That's Charlotte Dujardin referring to me. And I've said I'll stay on this case until the RSPCA take over. And another comment, absolutely agree. Animal abuse and cruelty is not only increasing, it's become more horrific. Yeah, in these times that we live in, where we've had more information than we ever had, and yet animals are still being abused in the name of sport. And somebody wants to see some video of me actually riding. There's none on your site. Is that deliberate? No. Well-meaning but physically unfit people are abusive when they ride. They can't help it. Yeah, fair comment. So I've said, sure you can. I'll include some in my next video. Although these days I have only been riding a simulator. When I was riding regularly, we didn't have phones with cameras on. I completely agree about abusive riding, and many riders are completely unaware of how much better they can load the horse. Hence why I wrote the textbook and provided guidance for them to develop better posture for riding. My techniques are instantaneous, and I've also included a section for riders aiming to reduce their weight using easy ways to incorporate light exercise into their busy day. So I will go ahead and show you a clip of me riding my simulator, just for the doubters out there. So if you want pictures of me, that's me there and my young horse doing dressage. And this is me doing some show jumping. Riding club, local. I always enjoyed my horses. Competing, I mostly did for them because they enjoyed the variety. They loved loading onto the trailer, never had to coerce mine onto a trailer, and we would go out and do something different, somewhere different. Okay, so here I am. My simulator is monitoring my vertical loading and my mediolateral, so left to right loading, and also back to front loading. So I'm aiming to be central as I can, following the movement of the horse. So just out of interest for you, you'll notice that I am the most balanced load when my pelvis moves under my shoulders, so I keep my head and shoulders level, and my pelvis moves forward of that position, not backwards. It's surprising how many move backwards. Okay, so hopefully that should be enough of a demo of my riding for the person who queried it. Okay, the book. So I finished, but didn't comment on what I'd read at the end of the last video, where Charlotte explains, Carl and I set about teaching him, me on Blueberry, standing next to a wall to keep him straight, no issues with that. Carl tapping his front legs with a whip, and eventually he managed to do it. But he was absolutely dragging himself. He was leaning his whole weight into my hand and he was completely locked in his jaw. Okay, so at what point do you say this horse is not correct? The horse has gaps in his education and in his postural conditioning. It seems to me that there's no creativity going on here. It's just cut straight to the end point or the outcome, without considering the horse. So why was Valegro so heavy in the hand here? What was going on? Why wouldn't they stop and try something else? Maybe they did, but again, this is normalizing coercion. We decided it would have to do. And on that day, it turned out to be the least of my worries. Not only was the weather hot and the flies out, so Blueberry was shaking his head all over the place. The horse had a problem, Charlotte. The horse should not have been ridden at that point. And I've known animals and even people, if you've got a pain, you want to put pressure on it. So whatever was going on that was causing the head shaking, was that part of the horse's strategy to alleviate the source of the head shaking, the neurological source of it, to the extent that he had to push so hard into it? Let me know. That might be me being dramatic, but you don't expect a dressage horse to be so heavy in the hand. I rode down the centre line, halted, went to rein back, and Blueberry did not move. He was locked in my hand, absolutely rigid. I tried to pull him backwards, so she added even more pressure through the bit, but he was like a rock. The only part of him that was moving was his head, and eventually it got to the point where he turned it so much I could see his face. Why not just get off and sort the problem out? Why does this have to be about I'm going to sort it, as she's admitted in her early days of training ponies as a child? The look he was giving me just said, what are you doing? I tried and tried to get him to move, and eventually one of the judges, who was chuckling away, stage whispered across, pull harder, in capital letters. So the judge is suggesting that she pull harder. This is just such unbelievable ignorance. So we go to 2008 now. A lot of the horses I was riding were just being broken. And because they were young and naughty, I'd end up getting bucked off. Even though it was tough, I still thought it was all good experience. Even with the young, naughty ones, you can still learn things. So here she is at nearly 40 years of age, talking about naughty horses, which we did 15 years ago. But nowadays, you wouldn't expect an elite rider to call a horse naughty. And you would also refer to the breaking process as the backing process. So I just see a very big lack of education here. I really, really do. But my mum is stubborn. It's where I get it from. Oh, is it? Okay. Much as I love all of my horses, if the right offer with the right home comes along, they're all for sale. Okay, so I can understand that a professional rider, professional trainer, it is a business. It costs a lot of money to go to international shows, although at the top they are funded. But yes, they do have to get sponsorship. They do need funds, and they need a lot of funds, and they need to stay at the top and keep competing, keep being seen out there, because then when they sell a horse, they get maximum price for it. But here she is saying that she loves the horse, but there's a price cap on that. It's very easy when you've got a horse that's been off to overdo it. Well, she didn't sit on this horse again for a year. It felt so good to be on him again after thinking it would never happen. But he still had many more months of recovery ahead and wouldn't compete again till 2011. So that horse had a severe injury and a lot of time off work. And she says because her horse was injured, she felt like it was game over for me for London 2012 Olympics. I still had Blueberry, Valegro, but I didn't know for how long. Although Carl had decided to keep him, he was now thinking of taking the ride on him back. And of course, that is disheartening. Especially I see it when horses are being shared by another rider, for example. The rider comes in and does a lot of work, and then all of a sudden that horse is sold, and perhaps the rider who brought the horse on doesn't get any remuneration for it. As a Group 1 rider, Carl wasn't able to compete at elementary and novice level. But once Blueberry got to Prix St. George, which would probably be in another year, the plan became that he would take over from there. So here she's got the ride on Valegro because right place, right time, and she's done the bulk of the work on him, which initially she stated that it was a fantastic experience for her, which it was. But now Carl looks set to take on the ride, albeit a year down the line. At around this time, Carl sold a part share in Blueberry. Again, as I said earlier, these top riders need a yard full of top horses because a lot of them fund the business. So it's not unusual to have to sell shares in the horses to pay the bills. Meanwhile, he and I carried on clocking up the titles. The Shearwater 6-year-old champion, this is Valegro, elementary and medium champion at the 2008 Nationals, and the advanced medium champion at the Winter Championship. While I was there, I also picked up the elementary champion on Duchess 4, who belonged to the owners of another of Carl's horses. It wasn't an experience I really enjoyed. She was a beautiful mare, but lazy as sin. Blueberry was the kind of horse you had to work at making calmer, but Duchess had absolutely no motivation, and getting her around that test, I really felt like I was pushing a baby out. As ever, I looked on it as good experience, and all the time my aim was to better myself as a rider and make Carl proud of the way I was learning and developing. Make Carl proud. So now this reads like she's looking for approval. She's approval seeking. So perhaps Carl, she sees Carl as having almost a parental influence that they might have on a very young child. And at this point, she's in her 20s. So, yeah, I think she does have a very strong approval-seeking personality. If he gave me an exercise to do, I'd go away and work on it and make sure I'd improved by the next time. I couldn't think of anything worse for him than having to tell me the same things over and over again. So it sounds like she feels fairly belittled by being asked to repeat, or perhaps she gets frustrated with herself, or she got frustrated with herself because she couldn't do it. But if she's got gaps in her training, dressage training, where up to now she's been able to wing it by being quite aggressive, rather than getting creative with, say, poles or some other gymnastic training, then she would have a different perspective on having to be told the same things over and over, or having a fear of having to be told. Anyway, one of the things, perhaps there'll be a sequel to this book. One of the things I was still struggling with was my sitting trot, which made me rely too much on my hands for balance. I mean, this is pretty amateur, novice, rather. Carl would often tell me that showing had given me bad hands, which was true. And because he's the kind of person who gives everyone a nickname, I ended up as Edwina Scissorhands, or Eddie. So they're making light of this, her hard hands, and it's not what you expect for an advanced dressage rider. It's just not. There is a huge gap in her training, or I would argue her postural training, that she needed to rely on the reins for her balance. She didn't have a completely independent seat, and Carl's given her a nickname. So did he address that? What did they do? What are the exercises? The key was getting stronger in my core. Yes, of course. But even though I was swimming, I still wasn't fit enough. Plus, I was about 2 stone heavier than I should have been. So she's not too different to many riders. That horse riding is an activity where the horse is expected to be fit, but the rider isn't. And there's a massive amount of benefit if the riders can master the basics of postural development. And if they can, that's when the magic happens. But initially, it takes a massive amount of core strength, if you don't have it, a massive amount to remain vertical on a moving horse, especially in sitting trot, because the sitting trot, especially the extended trot, that happens almost too fast, and there's too much force coming very fast from the horse. It happens too fast for the body to deal with, even experienced riders. So having the right saddle helps a lot. But yes, so she's getting ready for got to set her sights on the 2012 Olympics, and she's 30 pounds or so overweight. Staying in shape is something I've always had to work at quite hard, like most of us. But when I'd been with a former trainer, A colleague and her would get through a loaf of bread with butter and jam for lunch every day. We'd wash it down with tea and biscuits. And owners would always bring cakes and treats when they came to the yard. But yeah, this is the sad reality. Or yes, this was more than 10 years ago that she's talking about. But it's good that nowadays many riders are looking to themselves as needing room for improvement and getting the competitive edge by working on their own fitness and posture. If you remember me in the film I showed you of me riding the simulator, I was vertical, I was maintaining the vertical, and I was loading that horse equally, left to right, but I was seated in a saddle that was right for me. And incidentally, just to take you off piste a bit, I have found that when you work without stirrups, to take the stirrups away and not depend on them or not contact the stirrups at all, the paradox is that you load better, you're better balanced, and you make more contact with the saddle simply by not having the stirrups, which is easy to do on a simulator, but not always easy to do on the live horse. I look back now and think it's no wonder I was the size of the house, but I only realised it was a problem when I heard on the grapevine that Carl thought I could do with losing some weight. Yes, it is a devastating shock, but good for Carl for suggesting improvements. It's not an easy conversation to have with females. And she says, hearing that broke my heart, but he was right. I didn't want to be anorexic, but if I wasn't fit, I couldn't do my job. So I decided then that I was going to start going to the gym and get myself a personal trainer. And it is shocking that a rider can, at this point, be more than a decade into her riding, possibly 2 decades, and then decide that she needed to be athletic for riding. But of course, if you've never been athletic, when you become athletic, you then realize the benefits. And the personal trainer, she also came to study me ride and helped me identify that my right leg was weaker than my left. Yes, it's so common that riders have muscle imbalances, and many of us develop those from falling off a horse and can retain those injuries for many, many years, if not permanently. If you're weak on one side, it's obvious that your horse will have problems on that side too, yes. And it seems ridiculous that we spend heaps of money paying for our horses to have physio and massages, but don't think about the problems we might be causing as riders. I mean, to be fair, this book was written 6 years previously, and it's only now, really, that riders fully embrace the postural conditioning, and they'll take themselves off to yoga and Pilates and do something to address their bodies and postures and not just rely on the horse. And I won't take it away from Charlotte that she did a very good job of becoming a stable, strong, vertical rider compared with many other riders, except And I'm sure she would have improved and changed her reliance on her hands for balance. I'd never ridden in a helmet at home. Then one day the horse I was schooling bucked me off and my head hit the boards at the side of the arena. When I woke up, I couldn't remember a thing. My mind was blank. I'll just tell you a quick funny story about this. When I was in an indoor school with some friends riding, and we had an instructor there, and one of the group fell off, and the instructor had to assess her for concussion. And one of the group members suggested that we should inquire from this concussed rider who her current boyfriend was. Most medics might ask you who the Prime Minister is, but no, for this lady, it was challenging to recall who her current boyfriend was. An MRI showed that I had a small skull fracture, which meant I was strictly forbidden from riding for at least 3 weeks. It would be longer than that nowadays. Unfortunately, I had my regionals coming up fast, and I promised the doctors that I'd be sensible, but a few days later I was back riding again, trying to ignore the fact that I had such a headache and my skull felt like it was full of jelly. So that's not unusual for athletes. They just want to get back to doing what they really love. Carl's nickname for Blueberry was the Professor because he always said it was as though he'd read the dressage encyclopedia in his stable. He had trainability, but he was also naturally talented, and in that he had the ability to sit. He could push when you asked for extensions. But to start with, he was so hot he couldn't find the rhythm. Sometimes when you're training a young horse to piaffe, you lightly touch a whip on top of its bum to encourage it to find the bounce. But if you did that with Blueberry, he was so sensitive and willing to go, he would just try to canter. So here she's telling us that Valegro is super sensitive. And does that go hand in hand with his head shaking, I wonder? That level of severe sensitivity. But he sounds very off to me. He doesn't appear to be sound. Yeah, he may not be lame, but I consider he was very uncomfortable at this point, and that people around him just kept pushing and pushing, and that we know that he was a very tense horse. Well, when you're in pain, it does make you very tense. So how do horses feel as head shakers? I know each horse is different and there are different forms of head shaking, but why didn't they just acknowledge that this horse was uncomfortable and ordinarily should not be ridden until that issue was resolved? It just shouldn't happen. The problem was he'd then get so excited and strong, he'd start trying to do them everywhere, the flying changes. I had to keep doing a single change, patting him, then bringing him back to walk over and over and over. So he learned that sometimes one was all I wanted. I know horses are not stupid. Why can't she train them to the voice? It doesn't sound like these horses are getting much positive reinforcement, much reward here. And it's almost as if Valegro was so willing to work, or was he, that he was just the type of horse that you don't want to get off. So they keep going, they keep riding. Because he was still a young horse, he hadn't yet developed the ability to balance himself. So every time I tried to create a bit of lift, he pulled more and more on my arms. Some horses are born with really nice mouths and are very light in your hands. And some have harder mouths and take a strong hold. No, some of them are in pain. Then there are horses like Blueberry who have mouths like bricks. And by the time we'd finished, my arms would be absolutely burning. Yeah, because she just wouldn't stop and solve the problem. For example, would another bit have made a difference? Maybe, but no, they probably tried everything. And here was a head shaker that ordinarily would be retired, and which Carl was on the brink of retiring, as we learned in the previous session, and that he tried everything, almost to the point of surgery. But it's like, oh, okay, I can win championship after championship with this horse, so it must be possible to win even more championships. So her arms would be absolutely burning. This is not training. This is not dressage riding. Why does she normalize this? This wouldn't normally happen in a typical coaching session, so that if the rider says to the coach, I'm having to pull on this horse's mouth, the coach would suggest something else rather than pull, pull, pull. So gaps in training. Now, though, we were getting to the point where instead of just being my coach and Blueberry's owner, Carl was someone I had to beat. So she'd begun to ride Blueberry at bigger shows, and Carl would try to ensure he was there to warm us up. And although Carl's advice was always helpful, what I most appreciated was simply having him there to give me a pat on the leg and a few words of encouragement. Any competition I enter, I want to win. So obviously I wanted to beat Carl, but I never thought I actually would. So this sense of competitiveness is quite extreme, that her mentor, you wouldn't normally think of a mentor that you would catch up with and overtake in terms of expertise, although I wouldn't call her riding completely expert. But I just sit here thinking that's how she pays him back. That, yeah, obviously if a coach trains a rider, you may expect Carl and his level of expertise to train a rider to be better than himself, because she's much younger, and she said that Carl has back pain issues. So, but why put that in your autobiography? I would expect her to be saying, I felt so bad about thinking I was better than or as good as Carl, and that one day I'll be even better. But no, she wants to beat him at every competition. This story now is getting harder for me to read. We're really getting to the nitty-gritty. It's still very concerning. It's shocking. It's incredulous. So I'm going to leave it there, and I will be back soon. Thank you for contributing. Thank you for your comments, and I'll be back soon for session 4. I'm about halfway through this, or almost. And then we'll move on to some FEI business and how things are changing. Thank you for watching and following and being part of the revolution.